Welcome to The World This Week. I'm Mark Owen. Our guests to discuss the past 7 days of world events include Craig Capitas of the Daily Beast. Good evening to you, sir.
Hey, Mark.
Great to see you. On the other side of our studio, but not necessarily against, we have Bozu Darigari of The Independent and Matthew Dalton of The Wall Street Journal. Good evening to you, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Let's get underway with our first story of the week. Ukraine suffering some 30 Russian drone strikes and cruise missile strikes overnight. This has been the pattern all week, of course. Thursday, a 9-year-old child and a mother killed by falling wreckage of one of the Russian drones shot down over Kyiv. The intensity of Russia's attacks is unprecedented since the start of the invasion last year. Meanwhile, Russia accuses Ukraine of striking Moscow, Belgorod and Krasnodar. Gentlemen, the situation. Craig, can I start with you? Clearly, what we're seeing here is a kind of mounting of the situation from both sides.
Well, this is something that we said like 3 days after the war started over a year ago, that the Russians have the manpower, they certainly have the ammunition to blow Ukraine to the smithereens if they want to. And this is precisely what they're doing, using old school World War I tactics, leave the Ukrainians nothing but their eyes for weeping. And they're not, some pundits say, well, the Russians are going to run out of ammo. No, they're not. They have all kinds of ammo, and they're just going to dump it on Ukraine. And it will continue. This is going to continue. There's really no news here. The significant thing is what we're seeing happening inside Russia. The attacks going on in Russian facilities on the other side of the border. And the question is, who's behind that? Is that some sort of Russian resistance Maquis underground, or is it a Ukrainian operation? If it's the former, that's the most significant thing we've seen since the war started, because the only way Ukraine cannot win this war. It's the Russians who can win this war by overthrowing Putin, because Putin's not going to stop.
That's an interesting twist. Craig, thank you very much indeed. Bozu.
I mean,
your sense of it.
I mean, it's escalating. I don't think that there's anything new about the Russian attacks on Kyiv and other cities, the targeting of civilian facilities. I think it goes back to, the strategy he described as the same strategy they used in Syria, was the same strategy they used in Chechnya as well a generation ago. Bomb it to smithereens and just, crush the civilian population, depopulate areas, and then hope for the best. So, I mean, will that work in the case of Ukraine? A determined country with a sort of a emboldened sense of national pride? Well, I don't think it worked for Hitler in Russia. So I'm not sure if that particular kind of strategy works in a situation like Ukraine with a, kind of integrated armed forces, integrated with the sense of national identity and purpose.
In terms of what's happening, Matthew, what's your take on the situation? Clearly, this idea of these separatists, or not, attacking Russian ground, Belgorod, Krasnodar, the drone strikes on Moscow. What do you sense is happening there?
Well, I think the interesting question is to what extent this can really shake the position of the Russian government, the position of the Russian elites that are kind of around the government and that have some sway, even though power in Russia is increasingly concentrated in one man, Vladimir Putin. One of the things that I think Putin is trying to do at this point is he's playing a waiting game. He's hoping that the political will in the West to support Ukraine will dissipate. He's perhaps looking at the elections in the United States in 2024 to see if Trump wins. He's looking at elections maybe even further down the road in Europe. So I think that the one kind of thing he can hope for that can really shift things in his favor is a Trump victory in the U.S. elections. And if that happens, the key supporter of Ukraine, the United States, their commitment to supporting Ukraine with weapons and with other forms of support will be definitely in question. These kinds of attacks inside Russia, I'm skeptical that they can really have an impact and change Russia's position on the war in Ukraine, either one way or the other. I mean, I think one thing that's a potentially scary consequence of what we've been seeing is if Russia does decide to step up its attacks, as Craig was saying, they have the military capability, that God forbid they have nuclear weapons. Does this spur them to take even more draconian and criminal attacks against Ukraine?
Stepping it up towards the Putin's already threatened the nuclear option, hasn't he, to a degree?
There's one good thing there's one advantage that if the Ukrainians are behind this, just the attacks inside Russia. There's one idea that could take hold in another capital, in Beijing. When they see this thing, the Chinese were skeptical about this thing from the very beginning. They're growing more and more impatient. It's obvious. It's bad for business, and that's mostly what China is interested in Eurasia. They're not interested in this particular war. They don't care about Ukraine, really. They don't see it as part of a strategic conquest the way Putin does. So the more the whoever is doing this can make it seem like it's going out of control, moving into Eurasia, moving eastward, creating a mess here, creating a mess there, the more it might make the Chinese leadership nervous.
Do you sense maybe China sees a possibility of rebuilding Ukraine? Maybe that's their next way through it.
If I were Ukraine, I would dangle that, in quiet diplomatic talks, but that's not something you can talk about now. That's kind of, you would have to be a real vulture.
Indeed. Well, we get it all on the table here at The World This Week. Craig, Donald Trump, if he gets elected, would he really pull the plug? Would he really sort of say,
yes.
okay, let's do this. Let's do this to help my friend Vladimir? Seriously?
Yes. The man he's Donald Trump.
Seeing what the Russians have done in Ukraine, the war crimes, all the things that have been done, would he have the gall to do that? Surely not.
Well, he doesn't have a gallbladder, so look, Trump is a character without any character. It's not something I should be even mildly tub thumping, but I think I'm the only person at this table who's ever actually had dinner with the man for over 2 hours.
Well, we haven't, none of us.
No, and I'm saying it is what you see on TV is what you get. He is a complete narcissist, completely ill-equipped to be the president of the United States. But he's a character, and he's interesting, and he fits a certain mindset in the United States. We like our soap operas. We like our HBO movies like Succession and this and that. We like to see it for real. And much of America, or certainly the Republicans, enjoy it.
Brian Cox.
Yeah, they enjoy the show. I don't even think you need to have a social media account to realize this. If you just read the newspaper or look at, any cable TV news network in America, or even the nightly news programs.
Sure. But in terms of the show, Vladimir Zelensky, clearly his showbiz know-how and ability to perform has clearly helped to create, in some ways, the platform to get as many people behind Ukraine as possible. Do you think there's...
But just on that, I just wanted to say another point, which is that, the Republicans under Trump, they did do more to arm Ukraine than Obama did. Obama was actually quite skeptical of sending weapons to Ukraine. And because of Republican pressure in Congress from the kind of Lindsey Graham and John McCain types, that part of the Republican Party, who are very hawkish in terms of supporting Ukraine, the United States did end up doing more kind of militarily for Ukraine. Now, the question is, if Trump wins and also combine that with the rise in the Republican Party of the Trump-aligned part of the party, which is not supportive of Ukraine, you put those things together, and things could turn out differently. But it's very hard to know what to think of what Donald Trump would actually do in office based on his campaign statements.
Well, I can tell you that within the world of American cable TV news, there are a number of right-wing cable TV news outfits, which are basically the soapboxes for this group, and
the MAGA people, to be
clear. For the MAGA people, and there's a big argument going on, and I've seen it firsthand about certain people at these cable TV outfits are very, very much behind
Putin.
Zelensky.
Oh, wow.
And the other half are very, very much behind.
Even within the MAGA.
Yes, within the ones who control the airwaves, the cable airwaves of
unlike OANN. And Newsmax
yes. It's I have seen some of these arguments take place in front of Trump, and it's really quite interesting to to observe. I mean, I've not seen enough to have any serious reporting, but it's what we call, there's a nut of a story here, because there's a lot of yelling and screaming going on within that tent over whether you stick with Zelensky or you abandon him, and of course abandon NATO.
And that is quite a question to unravel, Matthew.
Yeah, this is an issue that interestingly divides the Republican Party. I think it kind of, you go back to historically, the Republicans were extremely hawkish on Russia, on the Soviet Union. It was Bush II, George W. Bush, who pushed very aggressively for the expansion of NATO, was proposing to include Ukraine and Georgia in NATO, far back in 2008. And that was one of the things that really ticked off Vladimir Putin. And it was Obama who was kind of like, well, I don't know if we want to do this. We want to kind of have the reset with Russia. So the issues, it's one of those weird issues in American politics that are not, Democrat, Republican. It's just, it's all kind of scrambled. So, it's very hard to predict what would happen if Trump and the kind of Trump Republican wing of the party won the elections.
But your assessment is correct in that Putin is counting on a Trump victory and will do whatever he possibly can, making mischief, bots, paying people off, doing whatever is necessary to ensure a Trump victory. The outcome, as Matt says, we don't know. But
do you know what that means, though? That means that they're counting on war until January 2025.
Exactly.
And that's a pretty grim thought for all the civilians living in Ukraine and all the
it is. It's
people living in exile right now.
Who's going to run out of soldiers first?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Putin can always kind of freeze the conflict or hope to freeze the conflict. I mean, it depends how determined Ukraine is to counterattack, to push things back towards the Russia. I mean, even to try and take back Crimea. That will kind of determine what Putin's how long Putin can wait, basically.
Yeah, the other thing, I was talking to a colleague of ours who's out at covering Roland Garros this week. And he was telling me that the place has erupted over fights between Ukrainian tennis players and Russian tennis players and Ukrainian journalists. It's just, it's like a war zone out there. And of course, the sports officials don't have a clue what to do. And you kind of get to the conclusion that people have to really understand there's a world war going on, folks. And you have to take sides. At some point, you have to take sides no matter who you are. I mean... Well, my former shop, the Wall Street Journal, has one of its finest reporters been locked up in a Moscow jail cell. Yeah, free Evan. You damn straight, you free Evan.
Explain about the badge so everybody at home gets it.
I was just showing support for my colleague, Evan Gershkovich, who's been in a Russian prison now for 6 weeks, I believe. And his detention has been extended until August. So obviously it's terrible what Russia has done to him. He's an accredited journalist, accredited by the Russian government to work in Russia. He's been falsely accused, and we're just hoping that he can be released as soon as possible.
Thank you for wearing the badge. Thank you for explaining so everybody at home is in no doubt as to what that badge is about. Thank you so much indeed. Let's move on to Kosovo. Emmanuel Macron adding his voice to the chorus trying to get Serbia and Kosovo basically to stop it. NATO sent in 700 extra peacekeepers this week after clashes in 4 municipalities in the north of Kosovo near to the Serbian border. Kosovan Serbs there boycotting the elections last month. Kosovan Albanians then, because of that, elected as, to the post of mayor. Armed security was used to ensure the safety of these mayors as they took up their posts. So, cue the violence. 30 peacekeepers were hurt in the process. Let's hear from both sides, Serbia and Kosovo.
I believe that would be the most powerful move and the move that might resolve the issues. It's withdrawal of an alleged mayor. As this has to be first move, and then I believe we'll have enough strength to carry on with our conversations, with our talks, to not only to de-escalate the situation, but to make some steps forward.
Where the pressure needs to go right now is Vucic's office in Belgrade. That's where the tough discussion on him understanding once and forever that Kosovo is a sovereign nation, Kosovo is an independent nation, and will remain so forever.
Well, the French president discussed the situation at the European Political Committee meeting in Moldova. Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz spotted speaking with Serbia's President Vucic, who we just heard from then. Macron's words came very shortly after this short videoed exchange.
Ce que nous avons demandé aux deux parties est très simple.
Our demands to both parties involved are simple. The engagement for Kosovo to organize new elections in 4 municipalities and a clear participation of Serbs in these elections, and that Kosovo deals with the question of the association of Serbian municipalities.
La question de l'association des municipalités serbes de la part du Kosovo.
To put it simply, those are the demands that we have put forward.
La demande que nous avons effectuée.
Emmanuel Macron there looking like the voice of reason, sounding like the voice of reason, but it's the problem that he's asking for two sides that will never quite see eye to eye to do just that. Matthew.
Well, one of the reasons why, the EU and the US and most of the international community has been for decades now focused on this situation to ensure that it doesn't explode into something bigger. And what the Kosovar government did here seems to have been a huge mistake, and they've really set their standing back in the international community. I mean, you've seen the U.S. and the French government, the EU, pretty much everybody criticizing what they tried to do here. And this is not, it's a very small political entity, a country that, it counts on international support as, dying to get into the EU. So they can ill afford to do things like this that really lead to the big powers, the great powers, let's face it, that to question their policies towards Kosovo. So,
Ozzy?
I mean, I think that the Serbians and the Kosovar Serbians have been trying to provoke this for some time. Look, there's an enclave in northern Kosovo that is mostly Serbian, and it's like basically a drug and human trafficking hub. And they've got their little rackets and so on, and they have their, kind of proto-fascistic, heavily ultranationalist Serbian kind of population there. In the former Yugoslavia, the Kosovars were the lowest of the low on the pecking order, even below like the Bosnians and so on, and with the Serbians on top. And the Kosovar Serbians cannot tolerate, and they will never tolerate this. Interestingly, I think this is like one solution. This is one of the situations where if they were quickly made part of the EU, none of it would matter because they would all all the drug dealers and human traffickers would move to Amsterdam. And the Kosovars would become day laborers in Germany, and the place would depopulate like the rest of the Balkans and Eastern Europe. But, and that would resolve this issue. On the other hand, Albania is an important player in this whole thing. The Albanians are a NATO member, and I don't know if anyone's been to Albania, but that is a country that is really genuinely trying to get its governance and economic standards up to an EU level. That'll happen before Serbia and the former Yugoslavia get into the EU.
Craig, do you feel that Macron's words will be heard by either side?
Well, I hope so. It's this fight has been going on since 1389 in the Battle of Kosovo, and I brought a visual aid. Učica, Kosovo.
A bit higher.
Kosovo Liberation Army. I covered the Bosnian Wars years ago for the Old Seed, and at the end of the war, I was for 3 months embedded with the Kosovo Liberation Army. And the war was over, and I said to the commander of the unit, "Is this over and done with?" And he ripped it off his sleeve, and he signed it on the back, Mr. Colonel Kurti was his name, and he said it's over. But don't forget, the Yugoslav crisis began in Kosovo, and it will end in Kosovo. You're right about the north. It's also the mineral-rich area up there around Mitrovica and the Stari Turg mines.
Sell it to the Austrians.
Yeah, it's a mess, and you need EU intervention in here now, real quickly, because what you're seeing here is the Kosovars. You don't want Učića to come back.
Didn't one of those guys get indicted at The Hague?
Indeed, they did. Indeed, they did. You don't want these guys to come back. In the same token, you don't want the Milosevic Serbian types coming back either.
You're a Balkans guy. To what extent is Kučić to what extent is Belgrade stirring this up for its own domestic purposes? I mean, he's like that kind of populist.
Well, yes, they are, because they will tell you, and it's true, that the Serbian Orthodox Church was actually founded in Kosovo, in Pristina. And the other interesting thing here is this is one of Vladimir Putin's zones of mischief. Of course, but what's fascinating about this is during the old KFOR days, when everyone went up from Bosnia to Kosovo, the Russians came in on the side of KFOR. Yeltsin had sided with the Kosovars on this, which of course you're not seeing now.
Let me just bring in Bozo and Matthew to talk a little bit about this situation. I mean, clearly, if 700 NATO peacekeepers can't work it out, gentlemen, who can? So, I mean, NATO is sending 700 in. He's saying you need to have EU intervention. He means diplomatic, doesn't he, obviously?
I mean, definitely, I'll just say that there is a lack of diplomatic and political bandwidth globally right now. Ukraine has sucked up so much energy. You go to Brussels, you talk to people there. No one cares about the Iran nuclear deal. No one cares about Syria. No one cares about the Taliban. It's just Ukraine, Ukraine, Ukraine. And that is, one of those side effects is that these sorts of conflicts, like including also like Sudan, these sorts of festering conflicts are just left to fester. And no one has the attention span to deal with them. And no leader, it doesn't get on anyone's agenda. And it will explode. Now, Serbia has been kind of checked. They were starting to serve as Putin's gendarme in the Balkans, and they were like read the riot act by the EU. It's like, guess who owns your country, essentially? Guess who invests here? Not Russia. So you better like get your act together. And they halted their disruptive activities. I don't think they stirred this up. I think that maybe they're taking advantage of it, Belgrade, for their own purposes in the way that right-wing populists do take advantage of these sorts of things.
Indeed, and Vučić in his previous job as a media advisor to Milosevic, I believe, obviously knows about that kind of morality. Yeah. Let's introduce our guest who's arrived braving the Paris traffic, Richard Verdi of Bleak.
Sorry to be late.
Great to see it.
Apologies.
No, we're just glad you're here because it's always a pleasure to have you in the studio.
Another guy in a blue shirt.
Blue shirts a go-go in this
mistake on the Booker. Hey, Booker, where are the ladies on this show? This is terrible.
If you're not wearing a blue shirt, you can't
2023.
Richard, we're discussing Kosovo and the situation there. I mean, clearly, I think the conclusion is we need some kind of EU intervention to stop this getting worse.
Probably considering that, to use very frank words, this has been a disaster for the European Union for the last 10 years. I mean, the amount of money invested by the EU. By the way, when I wrote my own stories a couple of days ago, I tried on the EU website, on the various EU websites, I tried to track the amount of money given to Kosovo. I couldn't find it. I could not find the total amount of money given to Kosovo for the last 10 years. So that being said, there was a huge effort by the European Union, and it has not been followed by normalization. Keep in mind the size of Kosovo. It's as big as a French département, so it's really small. So when you are not able to come up with a solution in such a small country, then you've got a problem.
700 NATO peacekeepers have been sent in extra since the clashes began in the four municipalities in question.
Well, you see what happened in Chisinau during the European political community meeting with Macron and other leaders. I mean, clearly saying, Albin Kurti, the Kosovo Prime Minister, you should act, you should organize new local election. So I believe there is leverage by the European Union, but to be fair, it should not be only on the Kosovo government. The same kind of leverage should also apply to Serbia.
Indeed. Kurti signed your badge. Is that the same Kurti?
Yes.
Yeah.
Same guy.
That's who's now currently leaving the country. And he signed your badge. Yeah.
Uchika.
So not only have you dined with Donald Trump, you've got a badge signed by...
Who knew? The food was better with Trump, though, I got to tell you that.
Yeah,
Long time
but the
ago.
influence that the EU has over Serbia in particular is a little bit sort of counterbalanced by the fact that both Russia, like they have this special relationship with Russia, and also China. The Serbia has really sought out. I mean, you say that the entity that owns Serbia, it's not Europe. It's actually China and Chinese state-controlled companies. They have a huge presence there. They own lots of factories. They employ tens of thousands of people. So Serbia has had this strategy of actually. They've got this kind of weird relationship with the EU where they've been seeking out Chinese investment to the point where the EU is wondering, what happens when Serbia has to come, if it actually ever makes it into the EU, what happens to all these investments where, it's the Chinese government following Chinese rules? Is that possibly compatible with being in the EU?
Indeed. But everybody talks about the Russian influence in Serbia, don't they?
Political.
It's political. It's political, cultural, the
religious.
the
It's
language.
Orthodoxy, it's the church.
But economically, China is arguably the main force there. They probably don't really care about this Kosovo issue.
Interesting to see how many people the Chinese company, how many actual Serbians the Chinese companies employ
Lots.
versus the European companies. I was just
Yeah.
curious to
I mean,
see how that-
it's. I wrote a story about a Serbian steel factory that was bought by the Chinese about 6 years ago, and they employ like 5,000 Serbian people.
Wow.
There's a kind of layer of Chinese management at the top, but it's mainly Serbian.
That's a good deal.
Serbian people.
in China.
But Matthew, the question on that I would have is so if the Chinese start playing rough, what are the workers going to do? Are they going to kick the Chinese out, or are they going to play ball with them?
Well, I think it's probably just like the relationship with any between workers and any management. Except that I think that the Chinese government probably has more of an inclination maybe to twist the arm of the Serbian government if push comes to shove, and they also own a bunch of Serbian debt. So that's another thing.
Interesting. We will watch that situation with great interest. Thank you all. Let's move on. Death penalty of homosexuality. International condemnation of a tough new law in Uganda, which targets the LGBTQ plus community. Even promoting homosexuality, which presumably means identifying as gay, could bring a 20-year jail term. Joe Biden, the US president, was one of the first to speak out against this. Human rights activists in Uganda, and that's a brave place to be a human rights activist, say that basically it's all about state-sponsored homophobia. Well, a guest on our debate show on Tuesday spoke of the fear the new law has created for her and her friends, no sooner signed by President Yoweri Museveni.
They are petrified because you can't leave the house, and even if you're in the house, someone comes and says something to your landlord is evicting you because they also don't want to pay the penalty or be liable or in any way. Because today, someone called someone's landlord and just told them, if you don't get rid of those people, we're going to come back and burn down your apartments, burn down the building. So now, even if it's you and you're the landlord and this is just a person and then it's your house, you cannot let this person stay. So this person who is hiding in their house now has nowhere to hide. So we are petrified. It's so scary. I don't know how we can begin to explain this because there are no words yet to explain it. But it's so scary. It's so dangerous. It's so bad right now to be identifying as queer in Uganda.
Gracie Brenda there, who was talking about the fact that vigilantes are taking it upon themselves to target anybody who they think might be gay in Uganda, and with some horrible consequences. Bozu, I mean, this is just, as the human rights groups in Uganda are saying, it's state-sponsored homophobia.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of a pattern that we're seeing globally. This is the most extreme example of that. He went there, outlawing homosexuality, and other, I think, right-wing populist countries in the name of family and God and nation have drifted in this direction. Recently, we had President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who before and after he was elected, made inflammatory remarks about the LGBT community in Turkey. This is a strategy. We see it with Viktor Orban. We see it with right-wing populists all over the West, and now it's being kind of emulated in other parts of the world as well. Mobilize people, get them riled up by targeting the most vulnerable and defenseless minority community in the country. I think it's, I think I'm a journalist and I don't like to say these things often, but I would say that this is kind of evil. And you're basically toying with evil by, let me say this, history has shown that countries who target vulnerable minorities in their politics do not have a history of developing democratically or even in a productive, constructive way.
And scary is that whilst there are many people condemning and sharing your views, there are some countries who are thinking, hey, this is not a bad idea. Ghana, I understand, Richard, looking to maybe institute a similar kind of law. Ghana.
Well, I think this was said. Those LGBT are a perfect target for those right-wing populists who want basically two things. On the one hand, they want to find a culprit for all the difficulties in societies, and on the second hand, they want to make families afraid, and in order to get the votes from those families. So I think that's been seen elsewhere. We could mention also Vladimir Putin, who continuously depicts the West for being an LGBT decadence continent. So there's no surprise. But I think there is also something else, that those head of state like Museveni, who's been in power for something like 20 years, they are very much afraid of the international activist network behind the LGBT community. It's true that there is a strong solidarity. These networks are strong. They are powerful. They know how to fight. They know how to struggle. So when these governments target them, it's not only targeting the minority, it's also targeting the political power that they see.
Of course, Matthew, one of the things is that if Uganda's looking for foreign investment to come in or support or any from, say, for instance, from the United States, clearly this is going to make people think twice.
Yeah, this is going to have a real impact. Both foreign aid, foreign investment by American or European companies, or from the advanced economy, the advanced world generally speaking. If this law sticks and no American company, no European company is going to start new investments. They have their existing investments, whether that will stand. And just I think to underline a point about the politics in the U.S. in particular, and also in Europe, is that there's been huge strides in terms of protections and equality and gay rights in the United States. It's a position that transcends partisan politics, for gay people, and the trans issue is now a big political football in the U.S. But that there is kind of a broad political support now, I think, for gay rights and for lesbian rights.
Well, I think this whole thing needs to be approached from a different perspective. This story has to be redefined. There are over 30 countries in Africa which persecute same-sex relations, and it's not going to change. And if America doesn't want to invest in what Uganda might have strategically, there are a lot of other countries that will invest. Yeah. And I think this story needs to be reframed. Why? Because I remember this same story 30 years ago, and nothing's changed. We have allowed places, or the Ugandans in these other countries, have allowed themselves to be turned into asylums of misfortune. And why is that? That's my question. And I think that we here at this table forget something, and I think our viewers do too. Our delta, what we're coming at this at, is from a liberal democracy. Okay? Uganda is not a liberal democracy. Turkey is not a liberal democracy. Russia is not a liberal democracy. China is not a liberal democracy. We can go down the list. So the question I have is, how do we reframe this? Why, after all these years and billions of dollars of foreign aid, American and other, into these countries, why is it still the criminal class that's in charge? Look at Nigeria. They're now having a fuel crisis. A fuel crisis in Nigeria. Am I wrong, Matthew? World's second largest producer of oil, or third? I forget. It's been a long time since I covered the oil markets.
A little bit.
There's a gasoline crisis in Uganda.
It's the issue that they can't refine.
I mean, I'm sorry, in Nigeria, it's remarkable to me. How did we get to this?
That's a big question, but I will say that one of the things that is kind of, they go in the West, they go after trans people now because you can't go after gay and lesbian people because they have a lobby and they have power and they own stuff. And so maybe that is actually one of the important things for, the message to send to LGBT communities in these sorts of embattled situation is get powerful, organize, own stuff. And then they will have to deal with you. And then, you see the Republicans in the U.S. who, I'm old enough to remember when they were, completely on the side of Museveni when it came to a gay and lesbian issue. I'm old enough to remember. And, now they've come around to supporting gay marriage and so on because they're afraid of the power of the
gay
LGBT.
community has tried that in repressive regimes for over 30 years. I've covered stories in that. Reporters before me have covered stories like that. And guess where those people are? They're behind bars. There's no way. It just is not going to work. They get too powerful in Uganda or any of these other non-liberal democracies. These dictators will arrest them and put them in jail. And I think that the story as we cover it, I don't know what the answer is, okay? But I think the story, the lead is no longer that the LGBTQ gay community in Uganda is being discriminated against and being sent to jail and can be executed for their sexual preference. I don't think that's the lead anymore. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to start yelling at me on social media. But that's not the lead anymore. I don't know what the lead is, but it's not that.
It's horrible that it's happening. It's horrible that they're turning people against one another to basically not just blow the whistle on them, but to beat them up and burn down their homes.
Yes.
The horrible thing about it, isn't it? That sort of sense that you're turning a people
It's awful.
against the people.
It's awful. It's God-smackingly
We
awful.
call it pogroms.
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
basically what it is.
I'm
That's
kind of
the
struck
word.
That, I thought Uganda had moved on since Idi Amin, but there's this horrible sense of this kleptocracy going through it all, which is still there. And again, turning on people like that, it's absolutely horrific. We need to move on, gentlemen, if you'll excuse me. Now, two women facing the possibility of the death penalty in Iran. Niloufar Hamedi and Alaya Mohammadi are on trial in Tehran. They're journalists accused of spying and working with foreign powers, namely the United States. Their crime, this is a good one, they broke a story journalistically back in September about the death in police custody of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. You'll recall Mahsa Amini was arrested over a headscarf incident. She died in police custody 3 days after being arrested. Eyewitnesses say that she was beaten by police. Iran denies anything suspicious ever took place. A number of issues here, aren't there? Obviously press freedom, but obviously the treatment of women in Iran. Gentlemen. Richard.
Well, I remember talking about Iran exactly here a few months ago, and we were all wondering, will the government, will the regime manage to not only survive, but to win the repression, to continue to repress? And that's exactly what's happening. I mean, clearly, when I arrived late, you were telling that it's all about Ukraine. Well, it is benefiting the Iran regime. The pressure, the watch we have now on Iran is not as big as it was before the Ukraine war, and now they got the backing, and you have this axis between Moscow and Tehran. So I'm not surprised that they're going after the journalist. We don't know what will happen, but clearly the sign is that they want to silence all voices after having finally managed to curb the protest.
Charges of spying and working with the foreign power. This is.
I know this milieu. I lived in Tehran. I know the kind of reformist press, the small network of very talented, very gifted, very determined journalists. What did these two women do? They did their job really well. That's all they did. If you look at the story, these guys went and they heard about a story about a girl who was killed by the morality police. They went to the hospital, tried to interview them, like what we would do in any kind of, if this happened in by Philadelphia police to an African American guy or someone who we would do the same thing. We'd try to report out it, and then one of the other journalists went out to the Kurdish area of Iran and reported on the funeral and so on, and that's basically what we were all trained to do when you are doing a story. And so basically they did their job. They did it well, and they did it bravely in an environment where there was a lot of eyes upon them, and there was a lot of security forces deployed everywhere. And this is a message to the journalists, to the brave journalists in that milieu, the very talented ones who are basically staying in Iran and fighting the good fight. They're either get out of this field, which doesn't pay anything, stop doing real journalism, or, here's your passport, get out. And they are fine with that as well. And that is the message of they're not going to put these two women to death. Trust me, they won't. They generally, if they do, I'll be completely shocked. But they are sending the message that these, women are facing a possible death penalty because they, did real journalism. So don't you dare do real journalism.
Matthew.
Well, the free press is one of the greatest threats to authoritarian regimes. And I think, given how much faster information moves these days, we're not talking about print anymore. We're talking about even just online. We're talking about social media, where information can just zip and quickly spread like wildfire, and protests can follow soon afterward, and that's what happened. So these governments and this is something that just the risks for journalists all around the world are going up, I think, as authoritarian governments realize the threat that the free press poses to them. And we've that's a documented trend. And my colleague is one of those people. These brave journalists are. So it's something that I don't know what to do about it, but it's frightening.
It is. It's one of these things. We take the expression, I think some of us.
This is revenge as well. These two journalists, they brought this story to the world. They are rock stars. They should be honored. They should be given massive awards on a global scale. They brought the story of Mahsa Amini to the world, and they did it in real time.
They don't need massive awards on a global scale. Where they need massive awards is in Iran, which ain't South Philly. And the issue here, again, trying to reframe this continuing story, is their readers. Why aren't their readers not standing up for them? Are they too frightened? Or
I think they did.
They did. No, but look, I see what you're saying. You're saying that
don't they care?
In both this one and the Uganda thing, I see where you're coming from. You're saying that we shouldn't impose our liberal values on these authoritarian societies.
I'm not suggesting that. I'm not suggesting
Iranian
that.
American, and I'm not imposing. I come from a tradition in that country that is rooted in liberalism and secularism and poetry and booze and art. So I reject the claim that I am imposing, or that someone else is imposing values on other people. There's been homosexuality since antiquity. That is not a Western value. It is just part of our
that's not my
ancient
argument.
heritage.
That's not my argument. I have questions. That my job is to ask questions, and my question is, why have not the Iranian people, the readers of these articles?
They wrote the articles, and they went out in the street for
massively.
I have not seen them been able to affect any change.
Right now. The World This Week. Thank you to Craig Kapitas, Matthew Dalton, Bosa Daragai, and Richard Verley, who arrived late but very appreciated you came. Thank you so much indeed. Thanks you all for watching. Stay with us. More to come here on France 24.